Democracy, one of the most important issues, one of the most important topics in the world right now, because the democratic space is decreasing in the world, shrinking. How can we work with this issue in a time when national leaders are restricting human rights for their citizens? How can Swedish development assistance contribute to support local officials and politicians? ICLD work with democracy and to support and strengthen democracy all around the world at a local level. And in a combination with this program, the input you got from this program, in combination with the experience and the knowledge that you have as a participant in this program, you can make a significant difference at your local community. Because in the end, you as a participant is an important change agent to uphold democratic values at your workplace. So welcome. Welcome to this seminar. Welcome to listen to this talk that we will have. I hope you will listen very carefully. My name is Bellman. I work as a moderator here in Sweden, and it's a true privilege for me to host the talk that we will have. And I would like to say welcome to the panelists, Johannes Oljelund, Carin Jämtin, Johan, Lilja. Johannes, you are Director General for International Development Cooperation at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And prior to this, you held various positions within the Swedish government offices. Why is democracy important for you?
I think in my profession, I could answer it in a number of different ways. One easy answer for a civil servant is that the government, our government, my government, has decided that we are going, that we have a drive for democracy, as we call it. The government has decided that this should be a top priority in our foreign policy and in our development policy, and hence it's important. But I could, I can easily also make that more personal, since of course democracy is a core issue. It's an issue I believe in, based on democracy as the best basis for to ensure human rights, but also as the most efficient form of government in terms of providing equity and a government that's accessible to its citizens, both
crucial.
Crucial, absolutely. Yeah.
Carin Jämtin, Director General of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, Sida. You have a long political career also at the Social Democratic Party, both nationally and locally. And I understood that democracy and human rights are very close to your heart. Why?
It's close to my heart for many reasons, but I would like to start from another angle, and that is one often looks upon democracy as elections every 4 or 5 or 3 years or whatever. But democracy is so much broader. It's actually participation as such for everyone in society, no matter if you are below or above the voting age of your country. So also 16, 17, 15-year-olds or children in Sweden are entitled to a democratic say in society, but only people above 18 are entitled to vote. Why I want to stress that is that democracy is both a system and it's a culture. And that is maybe the most difficult part in strengthening democracy. That is when we work with strengthening the culture of democracy. But democracy is important. This is a long answer to your question, but anyway, democracy is important because democratic societies deliver better, deliver more transparent, they have less corruption. There is corruption also in democratic societies, but it's less corruption. And democratic societies also have a better position for human rights and the rights for every citizen to actually participate. So it's important in many ways.
And Johan, Lilja, you are the Secretary General of ICLD, and when you joined this organization for 2 years ago almost, I read that you brought with you a lifetime's commitment to democratic issues and a desire to develop. A lifetime's commitment. Why is democracy so important for you?
Yeah, I think both my colleagues here have actually answered the question in a very precise way, which I could underline and say that I'm also committed in the same way. I think it's also from a personal aspect, when you have been living abroad and you see that the life is not equal for everyone, that you detect very immediate when you travel to a far distant country, that the possibility to participate or to the possibility to have equal rights and have a say in society differs. And some have no voice at all. And if you believe that every human being is an asset and that you believe in that every individual have a right to form their own lives, then democracy is the only way and the only possibility to create that. And I know also that the consequences, I could talk for long as all of us could do, but I think also the consequences of not having democracy is so horrifying, and we could see signals like when we saw Syria with the civil war. I mean, it was a country which had a lot of infrastructure in place, had a good hospitals, and you had good schools, and you had a lot of things in place, but you were lacking the possibility to form your own lives. And that was actually the reason why you have such a devastating situation there today. So I think you can promote democracy, but you could say that the answer why you're promoting democracy is when you see the results of not having democracy.
So what does it mean now when we see the democratic space is shrinking, decreasing? What does it mean from your perspective?
It's very clear that we see a pushback on democracy. I think 2019 was the first year when we saw more authoritarian governments than democratic governments around the world. And we see this, I mean, in a pushback where power is being transferred from elected bodies to the executive in different forms. And of course, this is being compounded by the COVID crisis, which gives sort of an excuse or a possibility to be more authoritarian. And that in itself is a sort of a call to arms, if you wish. We're seeing this development, and I think all of us gave some tried to give some clear answers why we need to push back on that. So that in itself, the development, the fact that we're having a pushback, which is so evident, that it should also give us energy and to be resolute and try and push from the other side.
But it's also easy to feel depressed.
It's easy to feel depressed, of course, in a situation like this. Like Johannes said, 2019 was the first year in many, many, many years where the number of authoritarian regimes are actually increasing. But at the same time, it's more important than ever to actually work for the rights of every human being on this globe to have his or her say in whatever matter, in whatever level of the society, and also for young people below the voting age to have their say. And it's important because otherwise we violate human rights charters that nearly all countries have actually signed up to. But it's also important because of delivery and us really wanting to fight corruption in every form. And to fight corruption, the best way to do that is to have a transparent society. So many reasons for us feeling worried, but also feeling the urge to actually work harder, like Johannes said.
And feel the energy to do it harder. And
exactly.
we work a lot at the local
Yeah,
level.
of course. I mean, my colleagues that are part of this program, and I would also like to say that the one who listens to this now are important tools to make a difference. Because when you actually go down to the bits and pieces of things, then it's actually the individuals who is standing up for the rights. Often, as you mentioned now, Carin, is that there is not a lack of documents that they have signed, and there is maybe a lot of policies and laws, but to actually follow them and standing up for them and deliver on them is the key issue here. So I think that is also part of it can be the change. Of course, when I see the shrinking space, I think that now I think it's actually 15 years of, if you look at the VDEM reports and Freedom House, it's 15 years in a row where you see a decline of democracy in the world. So of course, from that perspective, you can feel very depressed. But then you can also, I'm happy to see there is some African countries right now, like Ethiopia and others.
Sudan.
And Sudan.
Oh, fantastic.
So we maybe the role models is not found in Europe anymore. We actually see them elsewhere, which is also an important issue for the future, because we can also see that there is leaders, there is some light going through the clouds, even though we have...
So you are optimistic? You think this trend can...
I would say that I'm not optimistic right now, because there is too many signs where I think if you look at Europe, for instance, and we have Hungary with Viktor Orban. I mean, he has now, in his legislation, he has now the possibility to rule by decree. And he has not put any time limit to it either. And I think they also play as role models. So we have to remember that when we see persons that we actually think is out of line, they are also part of forming the world in the sense of that other leaders from Africa or Asia is also looking at Europe. And if they say, oh, they can deal it with in this way, then, then I can do it as well. So I think this is it's a mark for paying attention to.
Just a comment. I mean, since years back, or since 2 years back, every night when you turn on the TV, you see people on the streets around the world fighting for democracy. This should also be a, give us energy and give people energy. There's pushback against democracy, but there's a clear popular movement around the world, around the globe, including in Europe, but also we see it in Zimbabwe and we see it in Hong Kong and so on. We see this very strong push and popular support for democracy.
For a change.
Yeah.
And as you said, or mentioned earlier, Johannes, that the Swedish government response to this negative trend that we see is the initiative Drive for Democracy.
Yeah.
What kind of project is that?
No, I think it's the idea is to work with democracy issues throughout the different areas, both in the foreign policy issues, but also in development cooperation, which is, of course, what I work with. So it's the methodology and the ways of doing that needs to be constantly developed. It's not a new issue in development cooperation at all, but we are putting more financial resources and more emphasis on this, and trying to find ways of to reinforce democracy. I think, and this is done in many different ways, working with civil society organizations, working on transparency issues and so on.
But what would you say will be the concrete results of it?
Well, hopefully, I think there are examples, but I think that to aim for sort of clear transitions of power where you can very clearly measure might be, should be an ambition. But I think it's also clear that we can see results in terms of reinforcing organizations that can voice opinions, in terms of building systems that are, if states are not yet democratic, at least we can prepare them for transition that might come later.
Are you putting a lot of effort into it?
It's now the biggest area, focus area of in development cooperation in monetary terms. So yes, I think it's now about $800 million a year.
How important is Sida in this?
Extremely important. Yeah. More than 25% of our overall budget is actually allocated to the area of democracy and human rights. And it's an area which have actually grown a little bit the last couple of years, or for a while. And also the area of decentralization and local government has grown a little bit, slightly the last 2 years or so. For us, it's very important, but it's it's rather a broad issue. It can be support to judicial systems or women's organizations. local political parties in some instances. It can be many things when it comes to the area of democracy. One concrete thing that the government decided on in the frame of this drive for democracy was, of course, to increase the support to Sudan and Ethiopia. Those decisions were taken last year, no? Both of them, yeah. So we now have a bigger budget for those two countries. And the aim is, of course, for us at Sida to work stronger to actually support the transformation and the change in those countries. Huge countries, enormous challenges, and despite us thinking that we have a big budget, it's of course not immense, but still we have a bigger possibility of actually supporting change.
What would you say is key for you to realize the mission that you have on your shoulders, so to speak?
In what sense do you think? I mean, how to reach the goals, to find the right partners. To find the right partners at local level, and that is really the true change agents in respective countries. And they are different in all countries. There are countries where actually the private sectors and small and medium-sized enterprises are immensely important in the drive for democracy because, for one reason, they very much dislike corruption, and they know that in democratic countries there is less corruption. And in democratic countries, the laws are clearer on how to establish a business, etc. In other countries, it can be the women's organizations or political parties. So it varies. But to find the right partners, actually, is the most important. So those of you who are participating in these courses are extremely important, no matter what role you play in your country.
And if we look at the situation that we are in right now with COVID, the corona, there is a risk that the democratic space is narrowing even more right now. We shut down and we continue to shut down our societies. So in what way can we cast courage into those who feel even more isolated in this situation? What would you say?
I think that there are different levels of how to address this. One is to be very clear, and we've, on a political level, to be very clear that the development that we are now seeing, that we are following that, and that we are measuring sort of what measures are being taken in the light of COVID. One should remember that some decisions taken by governments are well within international law. It's allowed. It is a crisis. We have to take that very serious in itself. But there are also clear limits, and we must be very clear that we are following this, and that there is sort of there's a time limit. You were mentioning Hungary. There is not a day of reckoning. It sounds too harsh, but there is. We will come back to this, and we will. The world is following this, and that we're doing through different institutions. You mentioned VDEM is one good example of that. But then the other part, of course, is to try. While it's very difficult, you know more about this from Sida concretely, how to work, for example, with civil society. How are we able to measure? One example is that the government decided to take away sort of the ask for civil society organizations to co-finance because it's more difficult to collect money and so on. So that's an example.
For us, it's been important also to support journalists because in some countries, journalists reporting on COVID-19 are accused of actually spreading false facts, which is fake facts, which has been wrong, of course. So governments are using the COVID-19 to accuse uncomfortable journalists of actually spreading fake news. So what we have tried to, or we have we are supporting rather organizations that actually support these journalists for them to be able to go to court or to take the case to court. And that is small things, small money, but immensely important in the long run.
And there I just want to underline that because we receive a lot of reports right now where, I mean, to have critical dissent or have the freedom of speech on social media is restricted. And there is a lot of those, you can say, government, national government implications towards the citizens, which is actually also forming difficulties and challenges in the local environment. So I should say that. I also wanted just to say that when you are supporting important organizations, I should say, and I think we are like a portfolio of different stakeholders working in these different countries. And of course, it will not come as a surprise that I'm saying this, but of course, one of the things since I took the job to be the Secretary General of ICLD is that the local government always remains. Other organizations are there working, doing a fantastic job, but we need to make sure that this is into policies, into that they actually adhere the legislation to you can say human rights laws and international standards. So the job underneath from so to say, is extremely important. Yeah. So I would say that some of the victories is done by civil society have been able to push for different type of rights. But unless also the local governments is adhering their legislation towards that, it will not remain. It will actually not be something that lasts, and it's not sustainable. So I think it's a little bit of a resilient project as well to make sure that we strengthen the local democracy.
But you can use this particular situation in a good way.
Yeah.
But is there a risk, do you see a risk that destructive forces seizing the opportunity right now?
It's a huge risk.
Yeah.
And we see the sort of curtain, we can see it, of course, and we have to support the good forces.
Yeah.
And what they are, that also varies over the globe.
Yeah.
There's the expression that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. So that's the opposite of that. Try and finding the opportunities that are also in a crisis to reinforce good ambitions and good. But of course, it's any crisis and any sort of big pressure on society, and this is a huge crisis, which will also have immense effects in terms of poverty and so on. It will be with us for a long time, I think, and that will have effects in terms of democracy development also. It's not just. This won't be over when we find a vaccine and are able to push that out. It will have lasting effects.
The economic and the human rights effects of the COVID-19 will be with us for, I don't know how long, for many decades maybe.
Yeah.
What methods are the best to use here in this particular situation that we have, do you think?
I think Carin said something very important. Somebody asked me if this, you can say, democratic depression or recession will lead to depression. And I said, yes, it can, unless all good forces is working together. I think there is a time now where I think strategically all good forces need to sit much more together and discuss how we should outline a strategy because it will be devastating unless we are taking measures in the right direction, as I see it. Yeah.
If we look at the Swedish experience of local governance, that's a good experience also for others to take note of. What would you say that Sweden is doing good?
In Sweden or abroad?
I mean, both of them.
We have 290 local councils, and then we have the provincial level. So there are two levels of local governance in Sweden. And I think what distinguishes us from others is the level of decentralization and really giving real power to local councillors. They have the possibility of actually deciding on tax levels without national government interfering, and they have the possibility, or they have to decide on many areas like housing and schools and healthcare, etc., etc. And that actually many other countries have other systems where de facto the national government has the power and local councillors actually often are trapped, or that's a strong word, but it's difficult for local councillors to act on their own. And I think this discussion on what does decentralization actually mean and what is a decentralization of power, because that's what it's all about.
Because
there are also negative sides of our systems, of course, of our Swedish system.
So what should Sweden work more on?
we should strengthen. Yeah, there are many things in Sweden that we should work with. That's not maybe my area to discuss now, but anyway.
No, but I just want to underline what you said, and I would also say that, I mean, Sweden have a long tradition of democracy,
yeah,
and many positive aspects of that. But I think one of the key issues which will be a challenge for Sweden, if I just want to mention one, is representation. I mean, previously, I think more or less everyone wanted to be part of a political party on a local level, and were able to influence the local leaders of various things. So it was a natural flow of information of how to deal with democracy. Today, that is not really the case. So there, I think it's a challenge where Sweden needs to work with. Otherwise, I think when it comes to the structures, with that said, I think there is a lot of things that other countries could benchmark, because the mandate you're talking about, one thing is to say you have the mandate to take control of your local government, but you have no resources. All the tax money.
And you don't have any real mandate.
Then you don't have the real mandate. So if you don't link the mandate to resources, you don't really have the power to influence your local government. So, and there you can say quite many frustrated opposition leaders, they maybe won the election in the local environment, but the national government says if you don't do this or you don't do that, you don't get resources.
I think that in many countries, or what I've met anyway around the world, but also here, is that many also, not only opposition leaders, but majority leaders at local levels are frustrated because of lack of power to actually make a difference at local level because of other priorities at national level. So really to discuss what is decentralization. But there's one thing I forgot, and that is what I think that we have to do is to strengthen their interactions between politician and political life, being it on national or local level, and civil society. We need each other. They need each other, and have to work together. So we have to strengthen both parties, actually.
And in what way can Swedish aid support local officials and politicians? In other countries?
In many ways. We can support the local governments associations, so that we work with all local governments in the country, or work with having contacts between one local council in Sweden and one local council in Tanzania or wherever, and then work with the civil society organizations in the same local council areas. That it varies, but there are many keys and many ways to work.
Isn't this an example of what, I mean, what we're doing?
This is an example.
All of us.
All of us. No, that's definitely an example.
Yeah.
And I would also like to say that it's there is not one individual organization who can make a quick fix of democracy. I think when it comes to making a change, I think it starts with the local level. I think there is an individual, there is maybe in a home, or you can say in the city somewhere, that I are pushing for something, and that will also be the real game changer. And therefore I believe also the one who listens to us now have a great possibility to actually make a change that can affect not only their own environment, because that can also be a chain reactions, which also means that they also influence the national government in the end.
And I think, I mean, when visiting developing countries or partner countries where we often travel together, and I mean, this is a conversation that keep coming up. What does the Swedish engagement look like? What kind of engagement do we have? And often meet perhaps with ministers and so on, and there's a request for more budget support or more support to the government, and we always explain that our engagement will be broad, both in terms of local level and national and regional and national level, but also engaging with civil society, and that's a fundamental democracy issue. That's why we're engaging in that way, that we need, and that the idea behind that is also allowing the government to, they have good policies. They also need that strong civil society to spread it and have a debate and have it anchored in society and so on. So I think
And the development aid in Sweden is decided by rather government, and which countries we are present in. Sida is decided by the government, and we are present in 37 countries. And one thing that we could do better is actually to work closer together in those 37 countries. To concentrate more the resources, and the knowledge from Sweden could be concentrated more to these countries. They are in Eastern Europe, in Africa, in Middle East, Asia, and Latin America, so more or less the whole globe, but not every country in all of these places. And we're
no more coordination, I think, is of course, but I also that we have a clear split of roles. There you can say that sometimes I can notice also when it comes to the development that everyone is running towards the same ball. And here I think there is actually sometimes a bit of waste of resources that we are maybe giving everyone the same task. And here I think the distribution of support is good, that it also becomes clear roles. So I think to sit together and discuss the strategy is also very important. But of course I don't travel together with you, but I wish. But nevertheless, I believe also that the bilateral discussions when it comes to so to say empower decentralization is very important. I think the signals that you are sending when you are meeting also national officials is also part of giving a bit of strength to the ones who is participant in the seminar here today.
So,
a couple of years ago, the National Audit Office in Sweden actually made an audit of when have we reached the best results in strengthening the public sector. And that is clearly when we work at all levels at the same time. National parliament, departments, ministries, local government, universities, etc. So we actually work together in the same country at all levels. That's when we reach the best results.
Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this very, very important talk. We'll be back with part 2. Thank you.